There's so much to think about when you're moving to a new state, so we've put together a complete guide to moving to Atlanta. Be sure to save this video for future reference so you can look back at it. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Victor with Atlanta Suburban Living. We put out videos every week about what it's like to live in Atlanta and the suburbs of Atlanta. Today, we're talking about what it's like to make the move to Atlanta and a complete guide for making the move and living in Atlanta, Georgia. One of the first things that you're going to want to ask yourself if you're thinking about moving here is, do you want to live within the city of Atlanta or do you want to live in the suburbs of Atlanta? A very common thing that we often refer to in Atlanta is ITP or OTP. This stands for inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter. And the perimeter is Interstate 285 that kind of goes around the city of Atlanta. The reason why we make this distinction is because for the most part, everything that's within the perimeter is a bit more urban. And for the most part, everything that's like on the outside of the perimeter is more suburban or more rural if you go farther out. So the two are very different, not only when you're living here, but even when you're like going to visit or do attractions like sports games or, whatever it is that you do for, evenings and weekends or fun. Like the feel of these two areas is very different. So that's why we make that distinction. Another thing we should really discuss in trying to put together this whole guide to moving here is what exactly is Metro Atlanta? Because, it's like when you live in one of the suburbs of Atlanta, but someone asks where you live, and maybe not everybody is familiar with what city Duluth is. You just kind of say, oh, we're from Atlanta, but Metro Atlanta is the city of Atlanta and all of the suburbs of Atlanta. Now, what suburbs are included in Atlanta and what suburbs are not included is kind of a matter of debate. Some people would say the farther out suburbs are part of the metro area. Some people would say they're not. But for the most part, it's the immediate counties around Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is. Okay, so a couple more questions to figure out what it is you're looking for, and then we'll talk about making the move. Another big one is, what is your priority? Why are you moving to Atlanta? Is it for work? Is it to be around family? Is it to find better community? Is it a cost of living thing? And so all of these different things would determine where in Metro Atlanta you would want to move. For example, if it's cost of living, then a lower cost suburb is a great idea. Cities like Canton, Georgia, or cities like Smyrna, or maybe Lawrenceville. These are all great suburbs that I love that have lower cost of living. If it's that you want to be within an area that's close to work, then Alpharetta is a great city that has lots of jobs, big economy. Of course, Atlanta is another good one for that. Lots of jobs there as well. Marietta, those are some of the big suburbs that have big businesses and lots of economy, so lots of employers. If your priority is something like making sure you're in a good public school district, then cities like Beaufort or Suwanee, Duluth are all really great cities for having excellent public school systems. There are certainly some others. Alpharetta and Milton have great school districts. The east part of Marietta has excellent public schools. So where you are wanting to live is really determined by what is important to you. So another big one is if you're wanting to be close to the airport, then you might want to realize that the northern suburbs, which is the main suburbs that we talk about on this channel, are kind of far from the airport. Because the Atlanta airport is on the south side, most of the northern suburbs are about an hour, hour and a half away from the airport. The southern suburbs, Peachtree City, Fayetteville, College Park are some of the ones that I like. These are much closer to the airport. Another big question when thinking about making the move here to Atlanta is, are you looking for a move-in ready home or are you looking for a home where you can get a deal? This is really the thing that has been separating the two kinds of listings here in Atlanta for a couple years now. There are either like the perfect move-in ready homes that don't really have any problems, and they go under contract very quickly and the sold price is usually a bit higher than the list price. And then there's the homes that need maybe a little bit of work. They're not like complete gut jobs, but they may need a little bit of work, new flooring or new paint or something minor cosmetic that is preventing buyers from making offers on those homes. And those homes tend to stay on the market for like 30 days or more, and you can get a deal on those homes. You don't have to pay the list price. You can certainly pay below list. So these two categories of homes are a big part of coming up with a strategy to best suit your needs. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you've spoken to a lender. This is going to be the biggest thing to determine what your price range is and your budget for a new home. Whether or not you're able to get a loan here in Georgia, that's a big one as well. Remember that in order to buy a home here in Georgia, you have to have a job here in Georgia. So you don't necessarily have to have worked here for any amount of time. A simple job offer letter from an employer will suffice for being able to get a loan. But unfortunately, to get a loan for a home here in Georgia, you can't use your income from your job in another state. Well, you can, but you'd have a much higher interest rate because it would be an investment property, and it's much more difficult and not something that I would recommend because interest rates are already very high. So it's super important to have a job here in Georgia before you get that loan acceptance here. Now, of course, we can certainly help with all of these things. I regularly help my clients narrow down the right area and getting a loan and making sure we're using the right strategy to get the best home for them. If you're needing help with any of these things, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I'm always happy to help with your moving needs to Atlanta. Once we've kind of figured out where you want to live and what strategy you want to use for buying a home, the next thing that we need to think about is how the home buying process works here in Georgia and in Metro Atlanta. For the most part, it takes about 2 to 3 months from the time that you start looking for a home to the day that you close. Again, about 2 to 3 months. For the first month or two, we would be looking at homes online or looking at homes in person, maybe even submitting offers. And then once you submit an offer and it's accepted by a seller, you have about 30 days of the contract period to get to the closing day. That first week or so is made up of a home inspection. We'd make sure to have a home inspector go out there, give us an entire report on everything that they're finding in the home. They would look at all of the different details of the home, the specific systems of the home, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, foundation. Then we would also have an appraisal on the home. The lender would order this appraisal, and that next 2 to 3 weeks is made up of the lender going over all of your documents and making sure that your loan can be approved. And then that last week or so is the closing attorney transferring the title to the home to you, the new buyer. Of course, all of these things would be something that I would help out with. I would make sure that everybody is on top of what they're supposed to be doing. The inspector, the lender, the appraiser, the closing attorney. We also help out with negotiations. We help out with finding houses. This is all part of any real estate agent's job. And so this is what the 2 to 3 months of the home buying process is made up of. Here in Georgia, when you do submit an offer and the offer is accepted by the seller, you also submit a 1% deposit to the closing attorney. This is to show the seller that you're serious about buying the home. The closing attorney holds this 1% deposit in an escrow account, so no other money is commingled with that money, and it's 1% of the purchase price that you're offering. So if you're offering $700,000 on a home, you would put at least $7,000 into the escrow account. One thing that many people want to know is, how do you get that deposit back if anything goes wrong with the contract? So that deposit acts just like that. It's a deposit. So when you get to the closing table, it's your amount of cash, like your down payment and closing costs, minus the deposit that you've already submitted. But if something does go wrong, let's say there's something crazy in the inspection, you can terminate that contract and keep that deposit if it's during that inspection period. There are other reasons why you would be able to keep the deposit. For example, if something goes wrong with your loan and you're unable to get a loan approval, you would be able to keep the deposit penalty free. If there's something wrong with the appraisal. So for all of these things, you'd be able to terminate the contract and keep your deposit. One common question that we get when it comes to living here in Atlanta is, are there still things to do in the suburbs? I know many of our viewers come from places like Florida or California or New York, where they are much more densely populated and there's plenty of things to do all over the city. And so I think, especially for me, someone who came from Florida, I also was like curious about the suburbs of Atlanta. Like, is it going to be the country? Is it going to be like nothing to do out there? And it's not the country like that. There are plenty of things to do in the suburbs of Metro Atlanta. In fact, many people who live in the suburbs rarely go to Atlanta. I live in Marietta and I don't want to go to Atlanta. I don't want to drive through Atlanta. All of the things that we need for my family and I are here in Marietta. And if they're not here, then we would just go to one of the neighboring suburbs like Alpharetta or maybe Sandy Springs or Woodstock. We often go to. Roswell is a popular one. You know, we tend to find the restaurants and the shops. The public schools are all here within Marietta. Your daily errands, they're all local within the suburbs. You don't have to go all the way to Atlanta, and you rarely have to go to another one of the suburbs. Another question that we often get about living in Atlanta is about the weather and natural disasters. I've heard many people ask about the tornadoes. Like, do we get a lot of tornadoes here in Georgia? And I think that there maybe is some post somewhere about getting tornadoes, but we really don't get a lot of tornadoes here. It does happen occasionally, but it's very rare. As someone who has lived in Metro Atlanta for over 20 years, I have personally never seen a tornado here in Metro Atlanta. We have very few natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires. Fortunately, we really don't get any of those things. The weather that we do get is in the summertime, averages somewhere around 95 degrees, maybe 90 if it's a cool day in the summer. And then in the wintertime, the low gets down to maybe 20 degrees if it's a super cold day. On average, it's probably around 30 in the coldest part of the winter. We get a lot of rain. Actually, we get more rainfall than Seattle. I know this is super surprising. I think the average rainfall in Seattle is somewhere around 35 inches for the year. And then here in Atlanta, it's like 55 inches for the year. So that's certainly something that is very surprising for many people who are coming to live here in Atlanta. And then we have a lot of trees, lots of vegetation. We have clients who come from the north who are surprised to see just how much vegetation and how much trees we have here. I had one client describe Metro Atlanta as being tropical. And so that is really what it's like here. There is so many trees that it could be considered like tropical for someone who is not used to the climate here in Georgia. Again, where you're going to live in Metro Atlanta is certainly a big factor. Some of my favorite suburbs around Atlanta are Alpharetta. There's so much to do there. It's definitely one of the most beautiful suburbs, and it's like the gem of Metro Atlanta. Many people want to live there. Excellent schools, beautiful homes. In general, the whole city just is much nicer than some of the other suburbs of Metro Atlanta. Another one is Sandy Springs. Sandy Springs is super close to Atlanta. So if you don't want to live in Atlanta, but you need to be able to get to Atlanta very easily, Sandy Springs is a great suburb for that. Lots of things to do in Sandy Springs, lots of nature as well in Sandy Springs. The Chattahoochee River runs right through there, so that really has provided a lot of like walking trails, jogging, swimming, fishing, boating, all kinds of things right there in Sandy Springs. And then another suburb that is quickly becoming my favorite is Canton, Georgia. Canton is north of Atlanta, north of Marietta. It's kind of a ways from Atlanta. It's certainly not one that you would want to live in Canton and have to regularly drive to Atlanta. But if you worked nearby there around Canton, Canton is one of my favorites, and it's also becoming very popular among the residents here in Georgia. Right now, the average home price in Canton is about 500,000, but there's a very wide range. There are homes as low as 300,000 in Canton and as high as 2 million. So certainly a very wide range of not only home prices, but also home styles. The whole city is somewhat old and somewhat new, and that's because it's super far out, but it's had a lot of recent development. Areas like downtown Canton have been more and more developed lately. Also, the mill there in Canton is one of like these live, work, and play areas that's got lots of new construction, new shops, new restaurants. So certainly a lot of new things going on there in Canton. And then I live in Marietta, so this is certainly one of my favorite cities. Marietta is like, in my opinion, the best all-around city. Great home prices, not going to break the bank, great schools, 8 and 9 out of 10 public schools, lots of things to do around here, big economy. Marietta kind of has everything here, and it's one of the largest cities area-wise. So there's really like no shortage of things to do here in Marietta. Now, if you've watched my channel long enough, you've probably noticed that I'm super honest about these areas. I don't hold back when it comes to the downsides of living in any of these areas. And it's really important to us that you are very informed of the good and the bad when it comes to living in Atlanta or the suburbs of Atlanta. In fact, if you want a full list of the pros and the cons of living in Atlanta, check out this video that I made recently. I'll see you there.